the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
What do you mean there's an International Men's Day? Men don't need a special day. Every day is International Men's Day. Men have all the days, and men have all the rights. We can focus on men's issues right after we get all of women's issues addressed. Women's issues are bigger and more important than men's issues. Men's issues are women's issues. Men's issues all stem from misogyny because masculinity is toxic. It's toxic, I tell you. November 19th is International Men's Day. This year's theme, described on internationalmensday.com, is Celebrate Men and Boys. The site goes on to explain objectives of International Men's Day include a focus on men's and boys' health, improving gender relations, promoting gender equality, and highlighting positive male role models. It is an occasion for men to celebrate their achievements and contributions, in particular, their contributions to community, family, marriage, and child care, while highlighting the discrimination against them. Several men's issues are described following that, including the health gap, the workplace safety gap, the suicide gap, and discrimination against men in family law, and male students at every level in the education system. One thing all of these issues have in common, a major contributing factor to all of them, is how both the tendency and the social expectation of self-sacrifice for family and community factors into masculinity. For instance, it is mostly, almost entirely in fact, men whose labor, stoicism, accountability, and work ethic have gone and continue to go into the conception, establishment, and maintenance of society's entire infrastructure. I'm not just talking about roads here. Every convenience we have rests on the backs of working men. Most electricity is generated by burning fossil fuels to run steam turbines. Men drill or mine for those fuels. Men transport them or set up and maintain an infrastructure to transport them. Men designed, built, and operate the plants at which those fuels are processed and burned to produce electric power. Men designed, built, and maintain the grid of transformers and power lines that carry that electricity to every place where you use it. One of the main sources of this power, aside from fossil fuels, is nuclear reactors. We've heard much about this being a safer, cleaner means of producing electricity, and there is sense in that, but it does come at a risk, and accidents or mechanical failures can come at a terrible price. Men have faced grave danger, some sacrificing their lives to protect the lives of many others when shit has gone wrong at nuclear power plants. At the end of the day, your lights rely on men's labor, diligence, ingenuity, and not least of all, risk-taking. And that's just one utility. With very few exceptions, it's entirely men's ingenuity, labor, and risk that provide society with the fuel that heats the structures in which we live, work, and do business. Men that deal with society's waste, men who transport the goods we trade and the supplies we use at our jobs, and men who run in to fix the damage when disaster strikes and disrupts those systems, even when doing so involves deadly peril. It has been men's engineering over the centuries which has led to the opulence that civilizations of today are able to achieve. Should we ever reach a state when we as a species stop demanding men sacrifice their lives to our tribalism in war, that gives humanity immeasurable potential. While men's health is affected by various manifestations of their self-sacrifice, such as the factors that go into the earnings gap feminists wrongly label a wage gap, most health initiatives focus on the needs of women and girls. While men's suicide rate is far worse than that of women, initiatives on prevention focus on women's needs, and when they do focus on men, those involved often fail to understand the causes. We hear all the time that the problem is the expectation of stoicism from men, that men should be allowed to talk about their problems. But often, the very people who say that turn their backs when the problems men talk about aren't politically correct. Clearly, significant reform is needed. Discrimination against fathers in family court is one overlooked cause of male suicide. Not only is that an unaddressed injustice against fathers, It's damaging to their children and to society at large, because paternal nurturing is another unsung gift of masculinity. Various research shows that father involvement leads to a plethora of positive outcomes for children. A nurturing father improves the child's cognitive and emotional development. Children of involved fathers are less likely to get into social or legal trouble at every stage of life, more likely to experience success in their educational and career pursuits, as well as their social interactions, both with familiar people and strangers. They show numerous hallmarks of greater problem-solving skills, exercise of mindfulness and self-control, and experience of confidence. And they report greater overall life satisfaction. They are less likely to end up as unwed parents, on welfare, engage in substance abuse, or end up in legal trouble. Contrary to feminist promulgation, the most effective way a mother can protect her children from abuse, including as adults in spousal relationships, is to not alienate their father during their childhood, but instead maintain a healthy relationship with him. Politicians wishing to reduce crime and poverty would be wise to note the benefits of paternal nurturing in a child's development as well. Want kids to grow up to be good citizens? Father involvement significantly increases their chances. The men's movement knows that men are human beings with as much need and right to maintain their family relationships, to love and to be loved, as women and children have. But even if society doesn't care about that, it would be wise to consider, given the facts, that interfering with father involvement is flat-out child abuse and an attack on the overall welfare of society. Feminists have spent 2 centuries demonizing men as abusers, deadbeats, and clods, while simultaneously relying on men's ingenuity, wisdom, compassion, and protective gynocentrism to achieve every bit of legal and social change they have demanded. If men were as mercenary toward women as feminist promulgation implies, women's lives would be unimaginably horrible, like a cross between breeding stock and slaves, and no amount of protest would affect change in that status. We wouldn't be the primary caregivers of men's children. They'd be taken away from us the moment they could be weaned from the breast, for fear of boys being influenced by the lesser beings feminists claim they think we are. Think about it. Would you let your children be raised by other children? By chimpanzees? Cattle? Dogs? Certainly no nation's leaders would ever have given us voting rights. The risk that would be presumed to entail would be far too great under the conditions of feminism's patriarchy theory. And any protests which feminists credit with achieving reform would have been ignored, or worse, punished. But they weren't. Men's response to women's activism over the last 2 centuries demonstrates a desire for equal partners, not subordinate dependents, but equally accountable adults who experience equal freedom, who can be socially, legally, and financially responsible for ourselves, and who, in a relationship, can have our partner's back the same way he has ours. Women are in a civil war with each other over whether or not to even try to live up to that. And men have been caught in the middle. We have put them in a precarious position. Social and legal change have released women from restrictions and expectations that were in place to facilitate men's ability to meet associated expectations and obligations, without also removing those expectations or those obligations from men. Our society has forgotten the value of fathers and is failing to acknowledge, much less prize men's contributions to our species' eudaimonia. Simply put, humanity's entire existence rests on the hearts, souls, and backs of men. Masculinity is the seed of civilization. It's time society stopped turning that achievement into a millstone with which to crush men. Instead, support and value them as the human beings they are, for their good individually and the good of the entire human race. As International Men's Day approaches, we call on society to celebrate and uplift men, to examine the conditions that affect them today, and seek practical, compassionate remedy to establish equal consideration for human rights and equal accountability under the law for both sexes. Human beings, supposedly, are the smartest animals on the planet. Isn't it about time we started living up to that? Hello, and welcome to HBR Talk. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Woozle Slayer, Karen Strawn, and that adorable specter of death, Prim Reaper, ready to begin a mantastic discussion on the upcoming International Men's Day. To start with, I wanted to point this out because this is a near and dear thing to my heart. I'm here in large part because of the men in my life. I interact with other people like a normal person to a degree because my grandfather wouldn't accept that I couldn't do it. And I'm alive because my father wouldn't accept that I was going to die by the time I was 21. And I'm rational and logical because I wasn't allowed to not be. And it was the men in my life who pushed that as well. It was my dad and my brother that pushed me as I was growing up to investigate things and evaluate things and make decisions based on facts and reason and not just react emotionally to them. And while my mother supported all of that, women are more emotional display type creatures. I don't think we're more emotional than men. I think we are more prone to wallowing in them. Emotions, that is. And I don't think I would have been as rational of a person if I had not had the examples of the men in my life. And I keep doing this even when it's hard. And even on the days that I got to stay up for a full day, 24 hours at a time, to get everything done. Not because I am driven necessarily, not because I need something from this, but because I know it makes my husband proud that when I see something that needs done, I step up and get it done. So there's a lot of reasons that men have contributed in my life to my wanting to be here. The biggest reason that I'm doing this now is because I don't want the world to continue to do to men what they do to men, as my son, who is just starting his manhood, goes through his life. And as my daughters, who are going to marry men, go through theirs. So, if you really want a reason why Hannah Wallen wants to celebrate International Men's Day, it's for local men. Very local to me. The men that I'm closest to, who mean the most to me, and who are always there for me. And I guess that's, probably a weepy way to describe it, but it's mine, and I'll own it. And, I hope to hear from my co-hosts about their reasons. Do either of you have anything to add to that? Am I having the same damn problem I had before? Hang on a second. If anybody's talking, wait a minute and I'll accommodate Google Chrome's ridiculousness. All right.
Okay.
Now I can hear you.
Okay, good.
Okay.
All right. No, my reason that I would say International Men's Day is something to celebrate is because what sets us apart from, in terms of everything that I've looked into, and in terms of other primates, right? And higher order primates, right? So chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, other hominids that did not make it out of the Pleistocene, did not survive. What sets humans apart from all of those different primates is the relationship between males. And the ability of males to foster relationships with other males who are not related to them, even in the presence of females of the species, which is it's a very, very strange thing. It doesn't tend to the level of cooperation between unrelated males that men are capable of doesn't tend to happen in any other species that does not restrict reproduction to the point of there's only one ovary in the colony and everybody is brother and sister, right? So and so that's one of the things that I think sets us apart from every other species of mammal that allowed us to form not just societies of groups of 150 to 300 individuals, but these massive groups of people that all create an infrastructure and work together and cooperate and tolerate each other. So, I mean, like that's an amazing thing. And I think that we don't appreciate the fact that it is how men are different from the males of other species that largely makes us different in this way. And then on top of that, when I look at, like every time another person is blocked in, they're driving their usual route to work and some guy's up in a cherry picker and he's blocking traffic and he's fixing a power line or he's, trimming tree branches or whatever, or maybe he's dug there's a crew of men who have dug a hole in the middle of the road because they're fixing a water main that's broken or something like that. Right. And you get all of this, most of the feelings of people in cars who are inconvenienced by that is that, you're making me late for work. But what those guys are really doing is actually making your life livable. And if you look out your window, and I usually tell people first look at your window and then look out it at all of the things, including the sidewalks and the lampposts and, the roads and the other houses in your neighborhood and, the garbage truck going by. And, men are primarily responsible for those things every single step of the way, from thinking them up, from imagining them, right, to designing them, to doing the actual physical work of implementing them, to maintaining them, right, to improving them, right, all of those things that men do for us. And one of the most profound things I think Jordan Peterson has ever said in a presentation he was giving, he was in the Massey lecture hall or something like that. And he said, have a little gratitude, right? Like you are some of the most privileged people in the history of people, right? You are university students. You have the ability to keep attending school rather than going to work in some factory somewhere. You were allowed to finish high school rather than going to work in some factory somewhere. And you live on more than $2 or $3 a day. And look at you, you're sitting here in this lecture hall surrounded by all of this stuff that was put here by people who maybe didn't even have the privileges that you do, right? Maybe they didn't have the privilege of going to school. They were stuck doing, finish carpentry or drywalling or whatever. And that's their life. And, have some fucking gratitude for what you have. And stop whining and complaining that your lives aren't perfect.
Actually,
so
just a point on that.
Yeah.
If you're going to a university that is old and prestigious, that has long-standing traditions that go back to the 19th century, it was built by someone who worked before the 40-hour week was established. It was built by someone who may have worked 16-hour days to get that done. Just saying.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I mean, like, there were women among those people. There were women who shoveled coal onto lorries. There were women who worked in, underground in coal mines for a while. But it was primarily men who were doing those things. And it was primarily men who, I mean, if you actually look at what life in London was like before the sewer system, and the sewer system in London was an absolute miracle of engineering because it was built after the city had already been established for a long time. So you're looking at all of this is retrofitted. All of this is an underground system that was retrofitted after without demolishing the entire city and having to rebuild. But what people had to do with their waste before all of that was done was either they threw it out the window, they threw their chamber pots out the window, or they had an indoor, gardeloo, an indoor water closet that when it funneled down into the basement, and then twice a year or so, they would hire somebody to come and shovel all of that out of their basement and load it into carts, okay, and haul it away. That's what you had. So you literally had, for 6 months of the year, you had an untreated septic thing in your house, right? That you had to pay somebody to cart your feces and your urine away. And like the idea that, that we don't owe anything to the man who conceived of the London sewer system. We don't owe anything to that man. We don't owe anything to the men who came up with all of these innovations that have made our lives easier, right? Because they're horrible patriarchal males. And of course, if they hadn't done it, okay, if they had just stepped back and allowed women to, into the public sphere, women would have come up with all of this shit. Yeah, I'm not buying it. I'm more along the lines of Camille Paglia that, if civilization had been left up to women, we'd still all be living in grass huts. So, the lack of gratitude for what men have actually given us, where men have actually helped to bring us as a species is just absolutely flabbergasting for me. And at the cost that it cost so many men. I was reading reports, like actual hearing transcripts for colliery accidents in the 1800s. And, the cost of a man's life, right? Unless he had a widow, there was no concern unless there was a widow that you could parade and some children that you could parade in front of the jury to convince them to find fault with the company. If he was a single guy who, if he was unmarried, had no children, nobody fucking cared that he died in an explosion in a colliery, right? So when I look at the cost that was expected of men, that men paid those 16-hour workdays, and not just men, boys too, girls too sometimes, women too sometimes, right? But mostly men, mostly boys. And we just look at it and we think they're the oppressors, right? And no, that's not the only thing that they have ever been. If they were that, that's certainly not the only thing men have ever been. So,
yeah, I just wanted to kind of touch on the idea of gratitude there. And just before I do that, I'm just going to do kind of a tangent for a second. Obviously, I have extreme gratitude for my husband. He's a big, major support in my life, and I couldn't imagine being without him. But one of the people that I'm most grateful for is my father. because growing up, I've mentioned this a couple of times now, I've never really had too much of a good history with mother figures, either with my abusive stepmother or my mother, who was not always around very much because, well, she was off blowing the whole football team most of the time. But my father was my source of stability. He was the one who put the most effort into raising me. He was the one who, much like Hannah was saying, taught me all I knew about logic, about keeping my emotions under control. And a lot of the things in my life I attribute to my father, and I'm extremely grateful for that. But one thing that I've noticed a pattern in is kind of like the women that seem to be the least grateful and appreciative of what men do always seem to be the ones that either had abusive fathers or the ones who had absentee fathers. And whether the father was absentee because he chose to or because he was forced out of the child's life is anyone's guess. But that definitely seems to be a major pattern for the people that I've known personally who are readily dismissive of men and their contributions to everything that we have in society, is the people that grew up without these strong, supportive men in their lives. They're all of a sudden lacking empathy for all men. And while I don't necessarily understand the logic behind that, I can definitely see how this pattern of like single motherhood being much more common as it is now. I'm really worried about this pattern kind of increasing significantly with people not appreciating what men are doing because they don't have these supportive male figures in their lives. And I'm actually really worried about what the future is going to look like for the relations between the sexes and the appreciation of what men do for us.
I'm actually the thing that worries me the most, and the more I read up about chimpanzees and bonobos, the more I worry that we're headed towards Bonoboville. Because one of the things about Bonoboville is that the males don't, like females are dominant in that society, and it is the female status hierarchy that is the primary status hierarchy, and males gain their status through the status of their mother. So if your mother is high status, you're high status as a male. And one of the most striking things about it is there's very little violence between the males within the groups, but there's almost no affiliation between the males within the groups. So essentially, it seems to be that competition and cooperation between males is within groups is actually they are two sides of the same coin of male-male relationships, and you can't really have one without the other. Chimpanzees are much more competitive with each other. They're much more aggressive towards each other, the males. But at the same time, they're much more capable of cooperating and essentially getting together in a gang and going and doing some kind of cooperative activity. They're much more capable of doing that than bonobos are. And when I look at the cooperation aspect of human males, and how it sets us apart from all these other species of primate and also mammal. And I look at, where are we going if we actually do become a society where the female imperative becomes the primary imperative, right? Where the female dominance hierarchy is the ruling hierarchy, where female needs are essentially considered to be prime, and everything else is secondary. And are we going to be left with a society where men are simply completely alienated from each other? And one of the things that struck me as absolutely atrocious was that article, and I think Allison and some others tackled it. It was an article. It was based on a paper. It was a mainstream media article talking about a paper published by a journal that was edited by Michael Kimmel, the Journal of Men and Masculinities or something like that. And it was about how bromances, while they are positive in the sense that the fact that men are having bromances, where they feel emotionally open with other men and they have these deep friendships with other men, even though they're heterosexual, that is actually a sign that homophobia is on its way out, right? Because, you know, there's these guys who are being deeply emotional and deeply open and all of this with their guy friends. That's a positive aspect of it, is that it shows that, okay, guys aren't homophobic anymore. But, you know, on the other hand, you know, it's bad news for women. We need to look at how this negatively affects women, because apparently these guys are more willing to share their emotions and share their secrets and their deepest fears and deepest vulnerabilities with their bromantic partners rather than with their wives and girlfriends. And so we have this push, and I think this push has lasted a long time. It's been here with us a long time, to undermine men's relationships with other men, to kind of you can see it all the way back to that petition to King George to ban coffee houses. You know, because men were getting together there and being with other men, and they were outside of female supervision, and they weren't necessarily doing what women wanted. And when you look at that kind of idea that, you know, there should be no gentlemen's clubs that are men only, there should be no country clubs that are men only, golf clubs that are men only, gyms that are men only, there should be no nothing. Well, even the Boy Scouts should not be male only. There seems to be this drive in our culture to undermine the relationships between our males and weaken those things in order to strengthen the male-female bond. And why would we need to do that? Well, maybe it's because the male-female bond has been completely annihilated by feminist activism over the last however long, right? But it's almost like we need to coerce men. We need to give them no other options. You're not allowed to have any other option in terms of relating to somebody, being intimate with somebody, sharing your thoughts and feelings with somebody. Yeah, you can't do that with another man. You need to rely on a woman, because that's the only way that we can actually make it so that men and women are still going to get together. And because of all of it, it's like we're orchestrating this massive dysfunction, right?
And it's very short-sighted.
Oh gosh, it really speaks to the entitlement of women. Going back to that again, because it's like, rather than looking at ourselves, and it's like how women can improve to make men want to have these relationships with women again. It's like, no, we just have to cut men off from every other social source that they possibly have, and then they'll be forced to come back to us, and then they'll like it, or they can get the hell out of town.
Yeah, you'll get nothing and like it.
The thing that really bothers me about this is that these women that are doing this, they never think about, all right, if you're with a man and you have men in your family and they're important to you and you love and you care about them, and you break down an aspect of their existence that serves a human need, the need for companionship. The need for companionship isn't just categorized under must have sex and must have sex partner, you know, must have marital partner. No, you have a need for all kinds of relationships in your life. You have a need for camaraderie that is platonic. You have a need for a colleague type relationship. You have a need to be comrades in arms with somebody that you're not having sex with. And women are taking that away from men. And they never think. Yeah. They never think about the damage that does to the men they personally love. They're intent on controlling male society that they're willing to sacrifice the welfare of the men they personally love.
Well, what I think is absolutely atrocious is that it's not even so much that, you're willing to sacrifice the welfare of the man you love. Like, how fucking insecure are you? That you are jealous because your man has a buddy, right? And oh my goodness, he might actually tell his buddy things that he doesn't tell you, right? And oh my goodness, right? Like, maybe you could look at why he would share, those deep down freaking thoughts and feelings with his male friend who has been through so much of the same shit that he has, right? Because they're both men and they've both experienced life as a man, right? Why wouldn't he share that with you? Well, maybe he wouldn't share it with you because he would feel judged, right?
Or maybe because he doesn't want you to worry.
Yeah.
Sometimes men don't tell their wives things because they don't want their wives burdened with fears over things that they intend to solve. And so the problem may be temporary, or the problem may be something that the man himself can endure, and he doesn't want his wife worrying about him. And that's something that most people don't think of. Men will help each other through these things. Most women don't get it, that men will help each other through these things. Men will advise each other on how to solve these problems. You tell your wife, and she may be very sympathetic. She may agonize over not being able to fix the problem. But she won't be necessarily able to give you the same advice another guy who's been in the same situation could give you. And so what you end up
or she may give you advice that just isn't suited to you because
right. Or she's
speaking as a woman and you're experiencing it as a man.
Or she may give you advice that you could get from your buddy without your buddy worrying that he's going to lose his home and his children are going to be out in the cold, and your wife will worry. And so you get that same advice, but you don't scare your wife. And I've seen all of the men in my life that are married do that. I've even been the buddy that the guy shared information with and said, have you experienced this? What did you do in this situation? And not told the wife. And there are girls that I'm friends with that I would get in a lot of trouble with if they knew their husbands had confided things in me that they hadn't confided in the wife, because they didn't want to scare their wife, and their wife couldn't do anything about the problem. Well, it just blows my mind that women don't get that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and just one thing that I wanted to mention too, it's like, you were talking about how insecure are you? Well, there's also the whole turnaround about how much would they freak out if all of a sudden men said, oh yeah, you can't have your female relationships. You have to spend all of your social energy on us. Yeah. But then again, these guys are rarely very good at that kind of empathy, that kind of turning around the situation and understanding where everybody else is coming from. If they were, we wouldn't be in this discussion, would we?
Well, it really is. It really does strike me as bizarre that, one of the things that was mentioned in that paper was, that this is bad news for women, that men are having these deeply fulfilling friendships. Like, men are having deeply fulfilling friendships with each other. It's bad news for women. Like, this is it's a paper written by men in a peer-reviewed journal that's edited by a man, right? It's a feminist journal for sure, but there are men out there who just, I don't think they get it.
Well, they never figured out, in looking at what that article really said, they never figured out, they never realized apparently, that what they were saying is that in order for women to maintain long-standing marital type relationships, those relationships need to be codependent. They can't have relationships on an adult level that are healthy and normal and natural. They have to be the only source of emotional connection the man has. He has to be desperate for affection to get it from them. They have to be in a codependent relationship in order to maintain a long-term relationship. How bad of a thing to say about people is that? I mean, what they're basically saying is women are sociopaths, women are psychopaths, women are cluster B fuck-ups with no treatment to help them deal with their issues. That's what they're saying. Women are dysfunctional, and they can't have relationships that aren't codependent. That's so sad.
What drives me crazy too is because, like, every time my guy goes out, and he's got a few very close friends, and like some of them he doesn't go out and talk to them, but he'll talk to one of them for 4.5 hours in an evening over the phone. They work together, but it's sort of like, about 45 minutes of the conversation is about the actual work, and the rest of it is about just stuff, right? And I love to see him doing that, because he always comes out of those conversations in a better frame of mind, right? When he talks to his other friend that he's had since university, he always comes out of that conversation in a better frame of mind, feeling better about his position, feeling better about everything, including me, including, where he's at right now. So it's essentially like, if I were to, and part of me is like, I wouldn't want to be, and I have sort of been to certain friends at certain times, almost the equivalent of a therapist, or a parent figure, to certain adult friends at certain times through certain situations. And, that's not something that I would wish on anybody. So, like, I'm happy that he has all of these other people, right, that he feels close with, that he can talk with about these things, and he can come back to me feeling renewed and energized, and like he got things off of his chest, and he's feeling good. And I'm just like, like, because if it was all on me, right, if the burden of his emotional and psychological well-being was entirely on me, I don't know that I would be able to do that. I don't know whether I would be able to serve him in a way that that would be responsible and always, always on top of things, always there, always available. No, like, I have my own things that I need to do. And so, like, I don't, like, it really is down to a jealousy, I think, on the part of a lot of women, and a presumption of female jealousy on the part of men who see this type of male-male relationship as a problem for women. It is a presumption that women would want to be in that position. And I don't think that most women, if their partners were as forthcoming with them as they are with their bromantic partners, I guess, right? Or their male buddies or whatever, I don't think women would want to play that role. I really don't think they would.
Well, I can tell you I wouldn't. And there's something else I wouldn't want. And this just probably partly goes to me personally, my personality. To preface this, I mentioned my grandfather teaching me to interact with other people. I'm not kidding. He did. When I was born, I would bawl like a nut job anytime anybody picked me up and held me. I didn't want to be touched. I didn't want to have any interaction with other human beings at all. And my grandfather sat with me, and when I was just an infant. He sat with me and sang to me and rocked me, and was, nurturing and loving and caring the way that you are with babies. And he continued to do that until I got to the point where the fact that it was pleasant to be cuddled, and the fact that it was pleasant to have someone sing to me. And my grandfather had this marvelous, sweet tenor voice, too. It's one of the things I miss the most about him. And there's a lot of things I miss the most about him. But, and as a kid, I got to where I was more in tune with interacting with other people. But I'm not a social person. I'm a person that if I had not found a life partner, I probably would be living in a sport vehicle of some sort, you know, a camper vehicle of some sort, and driving around the country doing odd jobs, or doing photography and selling my work. I wouldn't stick around people. And that almost got me diagnosed as autistic when I was a kid. The doctor actually said I didn't fit the criteria. I was close, but I didn't fit the criteria. Well, Asperger's wasn't a diagnosis when I was that age. And so I'm probably on the spectrum. I'm probably at the very high functioning end of it. And probably when Asperger's was at the height of its diagnosis, if I'd gone in and gotten tested again, they'd have said, yep, that's you. But it doesn't matter. What matters is I'm not a person that goes out and seeks social contact. My husband, on the other hand, is. And he is a person, like, he doesn't like crowds, but he's got to have social interaction, and he's got to have it regularly. He's got to have people to go do things with, go to movies, hang out at people's houses, you know, that he's close to and trusts. And if he didn't have that, he'd be dragging me out to go do something 3 or 4 days a week. Go to the mall, go to the movies, go have, you know, go out to eat, go do something. And I would lose my shit, you know. Even this, I wouldn't even be doing this if it wasn't that there was work to be done. The minute I started to become more well-known online than, you know, 20 people knowing who I was, I'd have disappeared. I'd have closed all my social media. That would have been it. But this is important, and it needs to be done. So I'm involved. But I think there's a lot of people that have that mismatch of one person really is a social butterfly, and the other person is a homebody. And it is unfair to expect the social butterfly to stay home all the time and not actually enjoy the company of more than just one person. And it is equally unfair to expect the homebody to be the replacement for a group of friends. So I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does.
It's
No, definitely.
I might be an extreme example, but I think that there's a lot of situations like that. And people like this that write this kind of demonization of men having friends. And, you know, thinking about it, they act like this is something new. Like, did none of them actually read the Lord of the Rings trilogy? None of them,
I know.
None of them looked at the friendship between Frodo and Sam.
Frodo, yeah.
Oh my God! You know, did none of them ever actually read Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn? Did they not realize the friendship between those boys and how close they were to each other? Did they never read any of the old stories, any of the great old stories where there were teams of men who achieved things, or there were adventures that guys went on? They didn't go just by themselves. It wasn't just a single hero. It was a group of people. Imagine.
I imagine that these guys are the sorts of people who didn't really pay much attention to men, except when it was men that they desired something from. And then the second they noticed, it's like, oh my gosh, these guys have other friends that they want to pay attention to. This is terrible. They have to pay attention to only me.
Imagine what would have happened preceding the revolution of the United States, okay? Imagine what would have happened if those guys were not permitted by their wives to gather in a room together without women.
Yeah. I know. And when you, like, when I think of people like Michael Kimmel, and I'm going to play, you know, sort of armchair psychologist here, but I see it so often with there are certain boys, and a lot of these boys are, and I'm gonna use Thomas Sowell as an example, in a story that he told from when he was asked, you know, who do you credit for your ability to become what you have become? Who do you most feel grateful for? And he essentially said, it was this kid that was a schoolmate of mine that my parents set up. We moved from South Carolina to Harlem when I was like 9 years old, and they had arranged this friendship for me before I even got off the train, right? Because they were very focused on me being the kid in the family who was going to be able to take advantage of opportunities that nobody else in the family had, right? And they were also very focused on getting me in with the right sorts of people, including the right sorts of same age peers, right? So, and he said that, but he said that when he arrived in Harlem and he went to PS5, right? So public school 5 in Harlem, just your typical public school. He was not just the bottom student in the class because of the differences in the education systems between the two states. He was not just the bottom student. He was the bottom student by a long shot, right? So he was way behind even the second student from the bottom. And the only thing that actually made him not get a persecution complex in terms of race was the fact that all of the other students who were doing so much better than him were Black. Every student in his class was Black, right? So he never attributed it to race. He was just like, okay, I got to work hard and I got to do this stuff. But he made this friendship with this other kid. But when you have a situation where you have boys who are raised without masculine culture, so they're raised by their mom, maybe their auntie or their grandmother, right? They're surrounded by women. The women run the daycare, right? All of the masculine behaviors, the sort of instinctive masculine behaviors engaged in by boys are condemned, and they're called bullying. When in reality, most of those behaviors are just instinctive testing and sort of ritualistic ways of saying, are you able to be in the group or not, right? And so they grow up with this idea, right, all through their early childhood, that being nice is a feminine thing, and masculine things are being mean, essentially, or they don't exist. They're never exposed to them. And then they get their first taste in early grade school of boys behaving like boys, right? And boys essentially running you through the ropes, right? Like they're running you through a series of tests in order to see if you're going to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and say, yeah, I'm going to be part of this group, right? And those are all instinctive behaviors that have to do with, 200, 300, 500, a million years of evolution of men involved in hierarchies designed for hunting parties and war parties, right? So, I mean, like and these are instinctive behaviors that boys engage in, but they end up seeing all of those things because they didn't get kind of worked into them in their early childhood. When they're toddlers and all of that, they didn't get worked into that sort of rough and tumble way of boys. And then all of a sudden they hit grade school and they're on the playground with other boys. And so there's some boys who are engaging in those behaviors, and you have these other boys that have had no exposure to that at all. Not from a father, not from an uncle, not from a brother, not from, male friends, because all of their play has been supervised by women, and all of that got nipped in the bud before it even started, right? And so they see all of that masculine culture as toxic. They see all of these ways that boys test each other as toxic. And one of the really atrocious things about it is that when you look at how boys and girls establish and maintain friendships, girls pick all of their friends from a similar position, and they choose laterally and up the status hierarchy when they're choosing friends, just like they do with